Did you know? Capcom considered using traditional tank controls and fixed camera angles for the remake of Resident Evil 2 to please hardcore fans of the original. According to Capcom Europe's COO Stuart Turner, the team ultimately decided against it, saying, "The world has moved on and these players have changed. And if we did introduce old school mechanics, these fans might play it and actually decide it's not what they wanted after all." Nevertheless, Capcom were unsure how fans would react to the changes leading up to E3 2018. Producer of 2019's Resident Evil 2, Tsuyoshi Kanda, admitted that many of the original games' uses of hiding scares just off-screen wouldn't be possible with the game's over-the-shoulder camera. However, this only pushed the team to explore other creative means of scaring gamers instead. Kanda explained, "So you can be walking down the corridor of the police station. There's smoke, the corridor twists, and you still can't see ahead, even with the third-person camera. We can definitely create an atmosphere of unease, where you still don't know what's coming around the next corner." Meanwhile, one advantage the team discovered involved the use of sound. While the constantly shifting perspective of fixed camera angles makes surround sound unfeasible, this isn't an issue with an over-the-shoulder camera where the player is always right next to the character. Therefore, using Capcom's recently built dynamic mixing 3D soundstage, the team pushed 360-degree binaural technology to new heights, allowing the game to modify sound effects in real time relative to the player's position. The developers have aimed to make the remake nostalgic while keeping things fresh at the same time. Capcom reasoned that the game's scares would lose all of their effectiveness if gamers could simply recall where they all were from playing the original game. To combat this, everything from the layout of the police station has been subtly altered to keep players both new and old on their toes, while still paying respect to the original game's vision. Other changes were made necessary due to the game's greater graphical fidelity. For example, the team quickly realized that while the oversized shoulder pads on Leon's police uniform worked fine in the original's low-polygon graphics, they looked off in the remake's photorealistic art style. The remake's director, Kazunori Kadoi, stated that Ada Wong's classic red dress was dropped in favor of a trench coat for similar reasons. Kadoi told Eurogamer, "It goes back to the same thing of what would look natural to be wandering around in a photorealistic environment in. I think wandering around in that dress, just getting on with your job as a spy, probably doesn't look as realistic and believable as we want in this new game." One major element the developers set out to improve in the remake was updating the game's zombies. Capcom feared that the original Resident Evil 2 zombies wouldn't be nearly as scary as they originally were in 1998, thanks to the proliferation of zombies in pop culture over the decades since the game's release. The team spent a great deal of time reworking the zombies, which included creating numerous different walking animations. They calculated the timing of when zombies would reach out to grab the player, perfecting their biting and gnawing animations, and built a real-time damage system enabling zombies to react where they are shot. However, the developers were cautious not to remove too much of what made Resident Evil 2 a favorite among fans. For instance, while some of the team felt the alligator boss wouldn't fit in the remake's darker tone, Kadoi knew they owed it to fans to make it work somehow. The team worked hard to make the alligator more believable, paying close attention to everything from its overall design to the weight of its movements. Producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi said the team reiterated on the alligator again and again until they were finally able to make it properly fit the grittier world of the remake. The team was also careful to maintain the game's original 1990s time frame, and the environment artists avoided accidentally putting anything in the background that wouldn't exist in the 90s. Furthermore, while Claire Redfield originally rode a generic motorcycle, the team worked alongside Harley-Davidson to turn Claire's bike into a 1998 Harley-Davidson Night Train for the remake. Kanda stated, "I'm not saying everyone who plays will say, 'Oh, that's a Night Train.' Like, you may or may not be aware of that. But that's a detail that really rings true for people who are familiar with motorcycle history. That's the kind of detail we can use to really push the idea that this game was happening 20 years ago rather than now." Interestingly, this motorcycle has a nod to the original game as well. The vehicle's license plate is J2198, a nod to Resident Evil 2's original release date of January 21st, 1998. Additionally, the developers went out of their way to compose their own 90s grunge rock style song inspired by the likes of Pearl Jam and Nirvana for the remake's credit sequence. That's not the only design element that took from the 90s either. Claire Redfield's Elza Walker alternative costume has a surprising amount of history behind it. An earlier prototype version of Resident Evil 2, known today as Resident Evil 1.5, has many differences from the final game. One of the most prominent was the game's co-star Elza Walker, a young motorcycle racer who gets wrapped up in the game's story after crashing her bike into the Raccoon City Police Department building during the zombie outbreak. This version of the game got as far as 70% complete, but members of the dev team were unsatisfied with how the game was turning out. Eventually, Capcom consulted Noboru Sugimura, a professional screenwriter and a fan of the first Resident Evil, for help. After looking over the game, he reported that it didn't feel like a proper Resident Evil sequel and advised the developers to outright scrap it and start over. The team did just that, but not before ultimately convincing Sugimura to join the writing staff and help rework the game's story. Many changes were subsequently made to better tie Resident Evil 2 with its predecessor. Chief among them was turning Elsa Walker into Claire Redfield, Chris Redfield's younger sister. While Claire otherwise kept many of Elsa's characteristics, she was altered to simply be a motorcycle enthusiast rather than an outright racer. The inclusion of an Elsa Walker costume led some fans to speculate that some elements of Resident Evil 1.5 would be worked into the remake. Kanda denied this, saying, "No, we really wanted to pay respect to the game that actually saw the light of day. We wanted to pay tribute to the game that most players actually came into contact with and try out. Having said that, we did take the Elsa costume and made that kind of an Easter egg present to fans' DLC. So that was something where we kind of said, alright, let's take this." Despite Kanda's statement, many ideas from Resident Evil 1.5 did end up being in the remake. Several elements in the remake are taken from original concept art, such as Ada Wong and Claire's default costumes, and even the idea of Tyrant wearing a hat. Other ideas lifted from the 1.5 build are the RPD building shutter system and the incrementally upgradable game inventory. Many details about the game were discovered on January 11, 2019, when Capcom published a special time demo of the game that let players explore a section of the game for 30 minutes, but only for a single time. The demo was played 2 million times in its first week, and contained some interesting secrets in its own right. The demo revealed several Easter eggs in the game which reference both the franchise and the series developer. The base of the bronze statue in the RPD waiting room has a plaque on it with the phrase, "We do it." This is a reference to the video put out by Capcom in 2015 to announce that they were officially working on a Resident Evil 2 remake. Also within the RPD is a desk for Rita Phillips. This is a nod to Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, where Rita managed to escape the RPD building. The game also specifically references Rita's escape from Raccoon City. The goddess statue in the RPD building's main hall has been moved and redesigned to function similarly to how it did in Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. The means of completing the statue's puzzle have also been changed from requiring 1 item to needing 3. Speaking of officers, the original STARS team photo from Resident Evil 2 and 3 can be seen in the remake as well, hidden in some development fluid in the RPD's dark room. There are even references outside of the RPD. In the original Resident Evil 2, if the player walks as close as possible to the gate outside the RPD, the camera will switch to reveal several zombies at the gate. This small detail was also included in the remake. Because the remake also shares its engine with Resident Evil 7, several assets from the 7th game were reused in some way. The small desk mannequin in the 3rd floor of RPD is a shrunken version of the full-sized mannequins in Resident Evil 7. There's also a reused electrical box, some table flowers, and a grandfather clock. Interestingly, even some of the text scrawled on the wall is from RE7, such as Jack Baker's message. Another amusing reused asset is an issue of a magazine. The issue talks about the original outbreak in Raccoon City that took place 16 years or so before Resident Evil 7, which is a clear nod to Resident Evil 2. This made sense in RE7, but in the context of Resident Evil 2, the magazine would have come from 16 years in the future. Speaking of the future, plans for a Resident Evil 3 remake have already been leaked. A moderator of the Reset-era message boards called Dusk Golem has accurately predicted past Resident Evil events such as the delay of Resident Evil 7's Not a Hero DLC. And according to Dusk Golem, a remake of Resident Evil 3 is already being made. They stated, "I'm keeping my lips sealed on anything else, so don't ask. But Remake 3 is in full development right now. I think they're waiting to see how Remake 2 and Remake 3 perform, but Remake 2 is almost assuredly going to perform well." They also mentioned the reason as to why Capcom might choose to remake RE3 over other games. After Remake 2's release, Resident Evil 3 will be the only title in the series without a version that runs on Capcom's MT framework. Remaking RE3 would mean that all games share a common engine and code, and can be ported to future consoles more easily than an archaic PlayStation game. Did you also know that Masahiro Sakurai has pushed himself so hard during development of Super Smash Bros. Games that he's been hospitalized? For more facts, check out our video on Masahiro Sakurai. Or if you want something else, check out the DidYouKnowGaming video on Persona 5.